Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Life of the Lost. I'm Sam.
And I'm Megan.
And this week's episode is sponsored by Brown Lab Media. Brown Lab Media is a creative community helping to promote and create original content, personal brands, businesses, or anything media related by people of color. So if you have a chance, feel free to check them out. The link is www.brownlabmedia.com. All right, moving on to this week's episode. Would you like to introduce the person we're interviewing today?
Yeah, so today we are interviewing Joseph, a Peruvian adoptee who actually lives in Peru with his birth family. So I think that'll be an interesting spin.
Awesome. All right. And let's begin in 3, 2, 1.
What makes you super cool is just that you live in Peru with your birth family. Like, I don't know anybody else.
Yeah, it's actually not as uncommon as you would think. You know, there are a few people who, you know, even if they don't live here now, have come down here and, you know, have lived, right, with their biological families. Some even, you see, so I actually live in the city, right? I don't live in Lima, but I live in Callao, which, you know, I usually say Callao to Lima is like a New Jersey to New York, right? You know, it's greater New York metropolitan area, and down here you have the greater Lima metropolitan area, right? So, you know, you get on a bus, you're in Lima within 20-25 minutes. So yeah, there are other adoptees that have lived down here, and they might not have necessarily lived in the city. So what's the difference between living in the city versus living in the countryside? Kind of like living in the United States also, right? You know, there's kind of a big difference. I don't know, would you consider Minnesota the countryside?
Sam does.
I don't know. I guess.
I don't think it is, just because it's like countryside to me is like farms and like hills.
So I guess I see it like 3 different phases, right? It's like the urban, like city, the suburban, and then the country. I don't know.
And that's right. Yeah, no, of course. And New Jersey's primarily like suburb, right? And I guess you could say pretty much all of Lima and Callao are kind of suburby/urban, right? They're kind of in there. I mean, nobody has lawns, right?
Yeah.
That's something that just never. I honestly don't know. I mean, you know, I don't want to sound ignorant or anything, but you know, the Latin American countries I've been to. So you know, I just came back from Ecuador. I've been to Chile. I've been to Colombia. You know, it's the structure of how things are in the United States suburbs, for example, right? Having like a lawn and a backyard and everything like that. I haven't seen much of that. Then again, I also want to say I haven't seen a lot of it, you know, to be able to really have like a good handle on this. You know, I'm sure there's somebody else out there who would be able to, you know, enlighten us a little bit more on this topic. Or, you know, it's either one extreme or the other. Or you do have like farms and stuff, you know, you're talking about like countryside, right? Then you have farms with just like a lot of area and stuff. And rural Peru would be like that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's like, you know, one extreme or the other. You either have like urban or you have just farmland and stuff. Like that kind of mid-tier suburb stuff. It's out there. I guess like Chosica might be one example within Lima. You actually have like, you know, a driveway and you might have a backyard and stuff. Maybe some of the more developed parts of Lima might try to mimic that kind of lifestyle. But other than that, you really just have like 2 extremes. So yeah, okay. So my adoption story, right? Yeah, so I'm down here, right? Part of the reason I'm here is, yeah, right, to spend more time with my biological family. Obviously, I didn't grow up with them. I grew up with my, you know, parents in New Jersey, right? So I'm from New Jersey, Clifton, New Jersey, to be exact. And my mom passed away when I was 13 from lung cancer, and then my father passed away when I was 21 from, well, a lot of problems. I would argue that it's because he never really got over my mom dying, and you know, he let a lot of demons catch up with him, and eventually he, you know, the cause of his death was from like a heart attack, and that was, you know, since then I've kind of been on my own, you know, no immediate family, I guess you could say, right? And you know, we know how American families are, right? They're all kind of scattered throughout different parts of America. and stuff. So after, right, so that was 2011, right? After that, right, I was really just kind of like finishing up college. Then I worked for a year. Then I came down here for the first time, right, in 2013. And then I went back, I did a master's degree. Then I came back down here for good in 2016. And I've been here since, right? Yeah, I mean, I've come back to the United States, right, for visits, but I've been down here, living here, right, and working since 2016. So that's my story in a nutshell, right? I guess those would be like the big main points and stuff of my adoption story. I do still have like, you know, a good relationship, right, with my family in the United States. I think they're entirely understanding considering the fact that, you know, right, I don't have an immediate family anymore. And like I said, everybody does kind of live, you know, dispersed throughout most of the United States. I've got family in Florida, got family in California. Really, the only family, right, that would have been close was my godmother, right? I'm still pretty close to my godmother who lives in Brooklyn. And right, I think I have a cousin out there also, but everybody else is kind of all over the place. So, yeah, no, when I came down here for the first time in 2013, I met family from the Sierra in Peru, right? We're talking about countryside. That's really countryside, right? Some of you might know that area. And, you know, I didn't meet any siblings, and unfortunately, I just missed my mom by a few years and my dad by a few years also. So, yeah, I don't have, of my four parents, I don't have any left. Because my sister was living in Lima and I didn't, you know, get a chance to meet her on the first trip because I was in the Sierra. And then when I came back to Lima to get back to the United States, it was really, really quick. So they gave me her contact information. And then summer of 2013, me and my sister, since then, me and my sister have been in contact. And I, what do you call it? You know, she got a laptop and we spoke with each other through Skype. I was still learning Spanish at the time. You know, I had only taken, basic Spanish before that when I first went for my family search. And since summer of 2013, when I started speaking to my sister, my Spanish got really good. I went back and eventually finished the program I had started.
Did you only use did you only learn Spanish from talking with her?
Yeah, I would say that that's probably the best way to learn is just having somebody you can talk with every day, right?
Yeah.
You know, language learning is just something that is not necessarily difficult. It's just time consuming and requires consistency. So, yeah, I mean, even when I went back because I actually studied Spanish in Lima, right? The first time I'd gone back, I stayed with a host family. I didn't know my biological family at that time, right? I hadn't done my search. But I stayed with a host family and I, you know, studied Spanish only basic level. I was only there for 6 weeks the first time. And then when I, you know, the second year in 2014, I come back for the second time, I finished that program. But this time, instead of staying with host families or in tourist areas, I stayed with my sister in Callao. And that's when I finished the program. And but by then they're just like, wow, you know, I even skipped a level because they're just like, okay, so you've been speaking Spanish a lot, so you know you're getting pretty good. So, and now I'm here and stuff, and I've taken university classes in Spanish, and it's starting to get to be second nature, like that. So,
well, that's like awesome to hear. Like I don't know, I feel like I'm so like I haven't really like. I don't know, gotten to know you. So just getting inundated with all that information is just like, I just have so many questions. I guess.
Well, please ask away.
Yeah, no, to start out, I was curious, like, do you remember your time in New Jersey?
Oh, yeah. Right. So I'm still very close friends with, right, all of the people. You know, well, you see, the thing is, my best friends came from high school. The lifelong friends, I've got a few there, right? My two best friends, Matt and Dan, right? Dan now lives in Massachusetts. Matt still lives in Central Jersey now. You know, we grew up in North Jersey. Yeah, no, I certainly do. I don't think it's been enough time to say that I've forgotten about New Jersey yet,
Like, what was
or that
the age range that you were in New Jersey?
I was in New Jersey for the first 25, was it right? Yeah, first 25 years of my life.
Oh,
So
wow. Yeah,
yeah,
I was under the assumption that you were there to, like, I don't know, your teenage years, but I guess I don't know. I guess now that I'm thinking about it timeline wise, things wouldn't add up. I don't know.
yeah. Or you know what? Actually, to elaborate on that a little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
I lived in New Jersey until I was 23, and then between 24, 25, right, I'm in New York City. But I would still go back, and I mean, that's still right, the greater New York metropolitan area, and I would still regularly go back to visit my friends in New Jersey. And yeah, we're, we're still tight, and especially during the
Yeah.
coronavirus crisis and stuff, a few of them have lost their jobs, right? So we're just, watching movies, with my friends Gus and Brian, who are also considered like brothers to me, right?
Hmm.
We watch Rick and Morty, you know, every so often, and we're trying to, finish that off. So yeah, we're just, we're still in contact, and every time I go back, I always, right, they're basically the family I go back to put
Huh.
it in perspective, right? So,
I feel that. So I'm just curious, like why did you want to move back to Peru?
right, I guess right, being without any immediate family, right,
Hmm.
and no matter how close friends can be, I still think there's a sense in which, right, you want that regular, you know, I guess you want that regular contact with somebody really close. And, my sister was, you know, my sister actually had lost her sister, right? Who was kind of like her guardian and everything. So, um, you know, okay, so basically, my sister grew up in the Lima metropolitan area. She wouldn't be like somebody who grew up in the countryside. So we started to see a lot of like similarities. I think that's what's made it a little easier for us to kind of connect, at least in a cultural sense, right? And then she had also lost her guardian recently, like literally 2 months before I had gotten there in 2013. She had just lost her sister. So it's like, we were both coming from a situation where we had experienced loss. And I'm like, this is just seems like the next logical step, perhaps to heal, right? From like, a lot of life traumas. And yeah, I think that, other than that, I think it's been an excellent experience, to say the least.
Wow. So sorry, I was trying to get a perspective of timeline and just like a process of how one thing led to another. Um, so how old were you when I guess you realized that your mom wasn't well? Like, I'm just curious, like the mindset of these particular like sections of your life, and just seeing them like obviously like flow in a timeline.
Yeah. So I was 13
Okay.
when my mom passed away. And the thing about cancer, right? Don't know if any of you have had experience with cancer or people who have had cancer, kind of just creeps up on you. And
Mm.
usually when symptoms do start to show, that's usually there's not a lot of hope afterward. Um, so yeah, it really kind of happened fast. We had no idea. Um, that so it was like good 6 months before that happened. I remember in January, February of 2003, right? That's when she started going in for surgeries and different doctor's appointments, and eventually chemotherapy. And then by the end of June, the beginning of July, she was dead. So, that just to kind of give you a timeline. We are just literally just finding out at the beginning of the year, and by halfway through the year, that's all she wrote. So, yeah, I would say we didn't really know, right? Kind of just creeped up on us. Although we were told by people that Christmas, right, when we still used to go to like these family, big family gatherings and stuff,
Yeah.
that she didn't look good around Christmas time. But I was kind of in La La Land. And I also think that I don't think I really accepted it either until like, the last day, right? Still thinking, oh, all the, cancer organs can be replaced by donors. You just hold on to that hope and everything and stuff till like the very end.
Well, especially
But
at
yeah,
13, you know, like 13 is like your prime age. I feel like of just like hanging out with your friends and not really thinking that you have too much to worry about, for the most part. And then something like that gigantic kind of comes on your plate. It's kind of hard to
yeah,
understand.
I mean, there's a lot I can certainly talk about my teenage years, right? Because that most of my teenage years were spent with my dad, and I feel like my life would have been very, very different. If my mom had actually been in my life during my teenage years, not just there's a times that you finish high school, you start thinking about college, a lot of things change, you start dating people, things like that happen. And unfortunately, the unfortunate thing about a lot of adoptees in general, I think, is just the big generation gap between their parents and them and stuff.
Mm.
My dad listened to doo-wop. I mean, yeah, he was a young guy in the 70s and everything, but his teenage years were a long time ago, right? Like early
Yeah.
60s, just to kind of give you a perspective. And there is a huge disconnect. And I don't think he handled it, the best he could have, right? A teenager and stuff. I mean, we definitely got along, right? And I definitely appreciate, the years that we spent together. And yeah, there was a certain something about him and the way that he, his kind of like very libertarian or right kind of way of, if you screw up, it's on you kind of thing. I think my
Mm.
mom would have been a little bit more interventionalist in how I was raised. My dad was just like, okay, you do this, that's your problem, or it's very different way of thinking. I think so I do sometimes contemplate how would my teenage years have been if my mom had been there, but it's neither here nor there. So I'm here, and I like the experiences I've had in life up until this point for sure.
Was there ever a time like that you have in mind that maybe you were talking to your dad and he, because of how you explain how the kind of person that he is, was there ever like a moment that really hit you in terms of just being like, wow, like thanks dad for expecting maybe like some like a different response, or just maybe come to the realization that like you said, like he is a certain kind of person per se, and that it, I guess it won't change.
Right. So the thing about my dad was he was always very quiet. He was one of the
Mm.
more quiet parents. And I don't know, like, I know one thing that used to upset me was that he didn't seem like he was ever really like, proud of me for accomplishments or anything like that. It's something, like I think that kids definitely need, especially teenagers or anybody for that matter. But these are things that he wouldn't talk about openly, but he would certainly talk about them with other people and stuff, So, I mean, he did certainly, even if he was like, extremely quiet around me, he still spoke highly of me around other people. And that's something I'm pretty appreciative about for sure. So, but, really strong kinds of like connections like that. That's not some, I can say like, that's not something I really felt like I had throughout my teenage years. So,
Do you feel like there's a connection? So because you're living with your birth family, which it's so funny because like when I talk to you about it, you're like, I mean, so many people live with their birth family, and I'm like, I don't know nobody. So to me, it's just like so interesting, and just kind of diving into that for a minute. How, because you said you went there because you kind of wanted to feel a sense of family. Do you
mhm.
feel like there's the same sense of family that you had in like New Jersey versus Peru? Is it different, or maybe how is it different?
Right. So there are a few things that are different, but I think I don't think anything can ever replace New Jersey. That was a whole different kind of dynamic. There, I had parents, older parents, Now here I'm with a sister who's older, but not older by much. We're still peers. And then I'm living with a nephew, not my sister's son. It's actually another brother son, right? We've talked about child circulation
Mm-hmm.
before. This is a prime example of that, right? He's from the rural countryside. He came to live with us, to reap the opportunities of what Lima has to offer, right? And he went to school, and now he's a bartender, and he's working now actually. So he's actually not home; he's working, which is good. So yeah, what do you call it? How is the family different? So yeah, I never grew up with any siblings. So learning how to share, learning that arguments aren't the end of the world. Um, those are things that I've learned and stuff. And, I've literally learned. I'm 30 now, right? And these are things I'm just learning over the past 4 years, for that matter. So I think this has definitely been, a good experience for my own development and well-being in the long run and stuff. So, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's weird. Like I feel the same way. I was the only child, and I never had to like worry about siblings. Everything was always mine all the time, and because it's like I have a single mom, and I'm a male, obviously. So I think that kind of dynamic, it kind of gives me a little bit more of in my obviously my family dynamic, a little bit more of like because like
you were kind of the man of the house
in
though.
a way,
like
yeah.
there wasn't, and she's not very dominant at all. She's very submissive. You're way more dominant, so I feel like you
it's a
kind
lot
of
of
got
things that
whatever
play
you,
too, right? Because it's like, that's my baby, obviously mom, that's like that's my son, so that obviously
Sure.
can play too. And obviously subconsciously I might have realized that too at a certain extent too, where I'm just like be able to play that card. But dang, I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh yeah, sorry. So yeah, so I definitely know like recently, having to learn how to coexist, especially with like, coronavirus and all that stuff, having to be like more inside more, and having to cope with that sharing aspect of being in a place where there's not just me anymore. And I I definitely relate, like I've had hard times too, being able to delegate certain dynamics when people clash, because that's inevitable, right? And for me, I guess I never kind of really had to be like, oh, okay, like let's be equal, let's be fair, instead of my way, kind of. But like being used to it kind of low key being my way, even though things were fair in a way. But I guess that's
No,
my
absolutely.
experience. But
Yeah, I totally understand that, right? And the thing is, I'm also used to getting my way also, and realizing, even if you do make good arguments, right, in favor of something, emotions come into right play and stuff, and then and a part of politics, right, is not necessarily having a good argument or saying the logical thing. It's also taking this irrationality into account and stuff. And that's something I'm constantly at odds with, right? But and not necessarily with my sister or with my family, but just with Peru for that matter. And it's certainly very, very different, right? As opposed to talking to right, maybe people who know you or right, yeah, just using logic and arguments and stuff like that. But yeah, no, it's certainly something you learn, and you can even come to appreciate even, right, because it only makes you more understanding of other people, for sure.
what do you think of what's going on, down there right now? Like, is it
Okay.
as crazy as, I guess, not, I mean, I guess that suggests that it's not, but I was just curious, like, is it as crazy as kind of these videos I'm seeing? Because I know you only see sometimes videos at, one-sided sometimes, but not being there and just kind of seeing other people's outlook on it.
Okay, so right, I mentioned earlier that I just got back from Ecuador.
Mm-hmm.
So I've actually been quarantining, and then they check up on you, right? I
Really?
literally just got a call today, a random call. I was told it was gonna not gonna be for another 7 days from Tuesday, because Tuesday was already the week mark since I got back from Ecuador. They called me then. They called a lot of times on my cell phone, and I thought it was just a telemarketer. Then they called me on the house phone. They're like, you home? You have any symptoms of COVID? Okay, cool. And then they called me today, and now they're going to call me one more time in 3 days to make sure that I'm here and stuff. So I guess I'm pretty impressed with how Peru's handling this, right? Literally all the international travelers have to do this. So yeah, and plus I've got homework because I'm taking some really interesting classes actually as a kind of like a non-degree open student at my old university, but just online. Modern Latin American history, and then the geography of Latin America. Learning some pretty interesting things there, and so I've just kind of been hanging low, participating in the book club that we have every Tuesday, and so I can't really say I've been to the center of Lima to see the protests. I had a girlfriend between 2018 and 2019, and she was really into the protests. So I've gone to a few, and the protests do get like that, right? So this is nothing from what I'm seeing online and stuff. This is tear gas and rubber bullets. That's nothing new. So that's something that the protests generally get like that. We got hit with tear gas once. It's kind of painful and everything, but that's just kind of how they are. Now, what's different about this one is that I think all different social classes are getting involved. Usually, right, it was kind of more maybe the lower social classes, the working classes that have taken to La Plaza de Armas, right? Whereas now it seems like even people from kind of like the nicer areas of Lima are also getting involved. Everybody is against this, right?
I'm very interested. Like I genuinely don't know what's going on in Peru. Could you maybe explain a little something about what's going on?
Okay, yeah, I can try and do as much as I can in terms of like the whole big picture.
Yeah.
So the thing is, what you're seeing, the way international news reports on things a lot is that, corrupt politician was ousted by Congress. So, a lot of people, right, they just read that, they're like, oh, good for Congress and everything, right? They oust a corrupt politician, and, now the people are going to be happy. But the thing is, in this situation, we have a situation where the Congress is actually comprised of a lot of corrupt people themselves. So, and this president, he had no political ambitions, right? Never wanted to run for president. He didn't even want to run for re-election now. The thing about him is that he was actually overseeing an anti-corruption task force that was going to potentially implicate a lot of these Congress people, if not remove a lot of them from power. And, the Congress people who had actually tried to do this back in September and failed, but this time I guess they got the right number of votes to actually vote him out, and that's what happened. So there are a number of things at play with Peruvian politics. A lot of corruption and stuff has a lot to do with organized crime, right? So in Callao area, we've got one called Los Cuellos Blancos, right, which is translates to the white necks, and
that's like a gang group.
Have a lot of I guess it's more like mafia type, like
That's
Godfather
like next level,
type
right?
of stuff.
The white necks.
Mafia,
the white
like
necks. Yeah, like you think Godfather, Goodfellas.
yeah, that's like those big guys. Like you have gangs, like they just hustle they just control a few blocks, but like Mafia is like some like international, like really big guy. Or maybe they're not. It's this specific one, but when I think of Mafia, I think of like you said, the Godfather, the Italian mob, the 90s, and like New York. Those kind of like enterprises that are very rooted in bigger things.
Yeah, systematic corruption, right? That actually goes into feeds into the political system itself. So you have those guys. You have cartels, right? They're all over the place also. And the big thing that the international community is slowly finding out, this started in Brazil, is the case of Operation Car Wash. You know, you could go on Vox and look that up. Then you know it's the so essentially
Oh,
like
is it that with the gas and how they were bidding for like companies to take the who got the contract, but it was all kind of rigged, and then they started systematically going in and like figuring it out. Is that all connected to a certain extent?
it is entirely connected
Oh
to
wow.
what's going on here. In fact, the last three presidents, right? So Ollanta Humala, Pedro Pablo Kuczynski, um, Alejandro Toledo, they were all implicated in right doing deals with Odebrecht, right, which was that Brazilian company. That was well, really Odebrecht was really one of the many companies that was involved in that whole web of corruption, right?
Mm.
So yeah, they all got implicated. Keiko Fujimori, who is the daughter of the former president, the president who was president when we were all getting adopted, right?
Mm.
He, you know, his daughter eventually got involved in politics, and so did the party, right? Popular Force down here, and they were a pretty strong party, right? They held a majority in Congress and a number of different governorships, but they've since lost a lot of credibility, partially, you know, due to this, was it the scandal, right? The Odebrecht scandal, for that matter. So yeah, so that's certainly played a role here. And really, at the end of the day, you know who it is? The people who suffer are, you know, the common people who depended a lot on the infrastructure developments, the projects, right? You know, what would happen is people would, you know, launder the money instead of actually putting it into good engineering. And then when a natural disaster happens, you know, for example, a bridge that was here in El Rio Rimac, right? It just kind of crumbles. And then they go and they look at it, you know, and then they survey the damage on an insurance company, whatever. They notice that, yeah, no, this is not engineered properly. You know, they put just enough money into the construction project just to make sure that it held for however long. And then Peru, which is really prone to a lot of natural disasters, ranging from flooding, earthquakes, landslides, especially in the Sierra. This things need to be done well, but you're always looking to kind of save money for whatever malicious reason there might be, and it really affects our ability to develop as a country.
Have you been like personally affected by that? I don't know, or know anybody who like maybe, I guess because I know that there were a lot of like you said, projects that were supposed to start, but for whatever reason they're put on hold. I guess because the money isn't there, right? Because they would like, I think that's what I heard. Like they would set like future kind of things. This is going to be like this. It's going to set X, Y, and Z jobs, but like it never happens. So.
Yeah, no, they just freeze, or people don't want to do business anymore with the company who was funding it. So this is like the controversial aspect about it. So if you let the corruption continue, you let the project continue, and you let those jobs stay. And I feel like some of those politicians thought they were doing good, right? Quote, doing good, in just allowing it to continue while buying into the system, right? Is that the right way of handling things, though? I don't think so, right? But, that's essentially where the Peruvian presidents, the most recent Peruvian presidents, all kind of fell into this trap also. Because these are guys coming with a lot of money, and construction projects, not just in Peru and Brazil, but also in Colombia, in Guatemala, Argentina. They're all over the place, and they're getting the government funds on all of wherever they have presence, for that matter, and they would have been supplying jobs to all of those people, even if only temporary, right? But still, so that's always the thing. And the problem is, these countries are still in development. A lot of them are still growing their economy. They don't have a lot more. Peru, for example, is just primarily mining, right? Agriculture, of course, but primarily mining. So they're not really a manufacturing company, right? Like maybe Mexico, right? What was previously NAFTA, which is now the EU. They changed it, right? It's got a different acronym now, but those were more manufacturing companies. Maybe Brazil also, but Peru's kind of just we extract stuff, we send it to a place for them to turn it into something, right? Yeah, metals, right?
It's very
Like
limiting.
copper,
It's like
very
Peru
limited.
doesn't really have like that way out.
Or the
Like, it's not
bottom of the
like,
food chain.
yeah, there's not like any kind of like oil or something that's they can
No,
send out, or
But
that's very
but even
rich.
then, it's like the process of it, right? Like those extracting those like raw materials, the return value you get on those like supplies is so small compared to the return value you'd get on the countries that manufacture that stuff, being able to export those goods to whatever it whatever company, I guess, gave them the contract to make whatever item that that factory is making,
Yeah.
which is interesting too.
I look back and I think of where everything's made, right? And when you look in your house, everything usually says like made in Indonesia, made in China. There's a new
But you feel
kind of
that though?
wave in Mexico. Feel what?
Like the idea of that, like like say this is made in like Mexico, but the American company that got that made in Mexico got it cheaper than it made in America, but even the raw materials that the Mexicans needed to make that item got from an even smaller country, which it got an even less return value for those raw materials. So it's like
Yeah.
that's why we're on like the bottom in a sense, because we are now a manufacturing company.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird? How that like that money circulates and it means more when it's together than when it's separate. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean we very much are on the bottom of the food chain. And I believe we actually do have oil also, by the way, but it's nothing to actually, cause like a boom, I
Right.
guess you could say,
Not
right?
like
Where it would be
Venezuelan
enough
oil.
to, yeah, but they kind of screwed it up also,
Yeah.
and then there's also the difference between privatization versus nationalization, right? Part of this Odebrecht scandal had to do with, right, Petrobras, right, in Brazil, which was the national oil company, right? Um, and the nationalized oil companies are always, right. So you have the right that criticizes them for not allowing enough like competition and efficient extraction. That's it, efficiency and stuff. Whereas the countries themselves, right? They nationalize something, to make the revenue more for the country, but they also don't have the know-how or the materials to actually do it efficiently themselves. So that causes a huge problem also, right? It's like, so if Peru did something similar to that, would we be able to really do things as efficiently? I guess is the question, right? In the book club recently, we were talking about the idea that Machu Picchu and all of like the tourist industry around that area is actually not really owned by Peru. It's actually owned by Chile. The airport's owned by Chile, and all different foreign companies. So what happens if we just make Peru in charge of all of that stuff? Would they do as well? I don't know. Like that's the age-old question and stuff, because you might not get the same amount of funding for things. You might not get the same amount of know-how and stuff. So a controversy for sure.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
interested too. Like I know, like I mean, I bet I could probably look at this, but I guess it's a better perspective from somebody who actually lives down there. But I'm curious to your perspective of. I know, like I guess from prior information, Ecuador and Peru and Chile, I think is underneath it, or Bolivia, I forget one of the, but like what. Who do you think controls? Because I know that they've been in conflict like since the 90s, and maybe way before. I'm not sure, but like, who do you think is in like control like now? Who's in power to a certain extent like now?
Well, that's really hard to say with Latin America, right? Usually, you're thinking in, I guess, like developed world politics. We're thinking United States, China, Russia, right? Like the ones with the big landmass. Down here, even if there are like conflicts or right trade deals or anything like that, people really leave each other alone for the most part. No, like this crisis that we're going into now, nobody's going to intervene. Like just like we didn't intervene in Venezuela. You know, influence in terms of influence, my guess is just going to be probably Chile. Um, just because they've got the strongest economy, but they also had some trouble recently because of protests, right? And they will be rewriting a new constitution. It actually just passed referendum, so now it's going to go through another process. So they're trying to work on their own politics and stuff. But just my guess is Chile for that matter.
That's interesting. Yeah, I guess that's why I asked, because I'm like, wait, what? Peru doesn't like own Machu Picchu? Like, so then I'm like, all right, who's top dog there? Like, obviously, like I would think like Chile, because not to say it obviously in a lot of areas, but in that specific area, like when somebody's like a little stronger than you, and it's like, all right, whatever. Like you
keep it.
I don't know. You get a vibe though, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I feel like I was in Mexico. I definitely get a vibe that like, like ain't nobody saying nothing, but obviously like America is in control. Like if I was in Canada, I'd be like, well, we're strong, but America runs the shots here in North America. So I was just interested in that kind of like community within South America. That's kind of like a Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, kind of like that little, niche.
But how did that happen? Like how was it that the Peruvians don't own Machu Picchu?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Right. I'm actually not too sure on how that that whole thing developed. I mean, the thing is, it might have a little bit to do with what we were just, talking about beforehand regarding that, we're mostly, the most of our revenue is going to come from raw materials, small agricultural commodities and stuff like that. The big funding for anything, even the extraction of those raw materials and small commodities are going to come from companies from outside, which have a lot of money, right? So, yeah, the airport, right, in Cusco is funded by, I don't remember what, Chile or China. It's one of the two, right? And yeah, they can actually run things like the train. Those are, again, construction projects, which require a lot of funding. And, they're not always the easiest thing for Peruvians, right, who unfortunately, right, you can't really blame Peru, or you can't blame any of the Andean countries for that matter, right? Usually La Comunidad Andina, they tend to be tight, but that just might be because of their free trade agreement, or just because that's, all right. So within La Comunidad Andina, which consists of Ecuador, Colombia, Bolivia, and Peru, you don't need a passport to move between them, right? You could just go with your DNE, right, which is the national identification card, the equivalent of like a driver's license in the United States. And you just move freely like between them and stuff. So they tend to be a little bit tight in that respect. But yeah, the thing is, with a lot of the Andean countries, you've just got a history of, you think about back to the Spanish conquest and everything, right? The indigenous people were kind of, enslaved, and then after they were enslaved and the independence movements came, they were forgotten about. And even the economies, right, during their time, right, the focus was always on, just like one commodity, just like it is now, like a few commodities, if not one commodity. And infrastructure development really happened around the major cities and around whatever would go into moving those commodities from wherever they were, from the mining sites or the farms to the cities and stuff, right? And John Green actually has a really good, I remember John Green from Crash Course. He did something on Sierra Leone. This is kind of like a similar situation where you've got railroads, but only like, a couple of tracks that run from the mining sites all the way to the cities. And, they focused on all of this at the expense of the rest of the country now. So now you've got huge cities that are really, really developed where everybody wants to live. but the rest of the rural countryside is essentially forgotten about. And then to expect those people in the rural countryside to do the kinds of things that people in the city can do or that a foreign company could do is kind of difficult, right? I mean, to do those projects like in Machu Picchu, like in another airport, like in the train, like run those kinds of services and appeal to the market and stuff. I mean, if you're really into ecotourism, right, or just kind of like seeing things for what they naturally are and stuff, or like the traditional people, and you don't need to be around touristy things, then I guess it's kind of cool, right? Ecotourism would be great, but it's Cusco has also gotten really tourist friendly, and unfortunately some parts of the Sierra, and other parts of Peru for that matter, might not necessarily be safe. Cusco actually has that environment where it is very welcoming to tourists.
I have a question just to bring into perspective, like all this like information. So I guess my question is like, at what point did like, I guess, Peruvian culture really start to take a front seat in your life, and then maybe like was that like on the backseat of you moving down there, or did you intend to learn about Peru and that's why you moved down there? I'm curious about that.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I feel like learning about things is not, and unfortunate that I say this, but it's certainly the truth, and I think this happens with a lot of adoptees for that matter, is that I never thought I would be here. I never thought I would be as interested in things as I am now, or, part of it doesn't have anything to do with me. It's not just because I've had an ex-girlfriend who was really into politics, or that my sister talks about with me all the time. I was always very interested in politics in general, right? When I was in college, I was, on a pre-law track. I wanted to go to law school, and I majored in philosophy. So, just kind of like knowing theories and how, I guess, governments work was always something of my interest. And then kind of getting down here, learning about the culture, learning about the political systems, and then learning about the history, it kind of opened my eyes to just how the world works, for that matter. And it was a lot, it was a lot richer, I felt. Because in the United States, right, you just really have this, like, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, but at the end of the day, things are just kind of like calm. I mean, even, I don't want to, sound insensitive or anything, but even with some of those, some of the protests that are occurring now in the United States for a variety of different reasons, of course, from both sides of the political aisle, I would still say the United States is never going to be in a situation like you'll see some of the Latin American countries in, for that matter, right? Where things
you mean like
get really...
sorry, you're probably just about to say it, like the amount of like violence, the amount of like, because police, I feel like in Peru or South American countries, they're not as, maybe the word would be, well, they're more tough, right? Because I feel like there's not as many eyes on them as far as like United States. Maybe the accountability here is higher.
Well, yeah, I think because we're top dog, like in the sense of just being the power. And with that, comes responsibility.
Yeah.
Being able to set the standard. So when we have a problem, everyone kind of low key turns to us because we're the.
But they don't get. What I'm thinking though is like the Peruvians, like the cops, like you'll see more of kind of corruption, I feel like, down there, and they don't get in trouble. It just is more natural.
Yeah, I guess. Well, maybe
Because I guess like we were watching a documentary, I think, on Brazil,
yeah.
and just seeing the crime there, and I think it was like the rate of the amount of like police killings was up like 80%.
American government system will always be strong enough to always. You'll be able, I think, hopefully, to have these kind of protests for it to get probably like maybe a little bit more violent than normal, but it always kind of being able to heal itself in a way. Things will get changed. Progress will be made. And maybe in, like, for instance, Brazil, everything's just so lawless that, there's no incentive for like the government per se to maybe make those kind of changes, or can even make those kind of changes because of like the corruption within the government itself. I don't know.
Sure. I mean, you've got the problem of corruption, right, which is rampant. And you've got the president of Brazil now, like the equivalent of Donald Trump. He's actually said a lot worse things than Trump, which I will not mention, but just terrible things about women, about the LGBT community is crazy. But the police killings in Brazil are probably going to go up, right? Because he supports that. If he was elected on a platform of bringing down the crime rate, because the crime rate was previously, right, like 6 times that of the homicide rate was previously that 6 times that of the United States. So and people, when you're going outside all the time and you're feeling unsafe and you're afraid that you're going to get robbed all the time, right? It really does something to the general populace, and that's why they elected a right-wing leader, right? It's Bolsonaro right now in Brazil. So, but in doing that, you also realize you're gonna, you're probably gonna sacrifice a lot of social services. He's going after the pension system now, so people are gonna have to retire later. And also the Amazon, I mean, it always has a fire season, but most especially it's right. Most recently, it's been kind of disastrous, and because he's been putting more funding into the military than into firefighting, the Amazon and its protection rights, that's going to suffer also. So there's a reason why the general populace wanted a leader like that, and now, right, and partially because of Odebrecht, right, the Odebrecht scandal that we were talking about, and the failure of the previous, if you can call it the failure, but just the unfortunate circumstances of the previous left-wing party that was kind of fell into this whole scandal and everything. So people wanted a change, just like in America, right? People wanted a change in 2016, and we got that guy for the last 4 years. But now things are changing, hopefully for the better. And people wake up. People are conscious. That's the good thing about Latin America, is people are conscious of things.
Do you think this is gonna change things though in Peru? Do you think the protesting and everything is going to create a difference?
Well, there's also something else to take in mind about this protest right now, and all of the things that are going up in smoke right now, is that this is only a provisional government, right? They have to honor elections next April. So we're going to boot the president, that's fine, but we have to respect the timeline of elections and stuff. So it's hard to say whether or not we're going to be able to get the past guy back. I fear that's probably not going to happen. That's probably my opinion.
That's what a lot of people are protesting right now, is because they want the president to come back.
But didn't you say that he doesn't want to come back?
Or that he doesn't really want to be the president, kind of?
He doesn't want to run for re-election, but he wanted to finish out his term.
When does the term end?
April of next year.
Oh, April.
So they just... Wait, so why did they kick him out?
Congress.
The Congress... Okay, so he was charged with accepting bribes. I don't remember from where, but just accepting bribes during his time as a governor of Moquegua, right? Which is a southern state in Peru, which was, kind of earlier in his political career. So this was even before he was vice president, because remember, he was replacing the president before him, right? So this was even before he was vice president, probably right before that. So he's getting charged with that. Now, commentators say that this is something that they could have waited on, right? This is not like an urgent issue, especially considering the fact that we're in, Corona crisis times. He's overseeing the corruption task force, and there's 100 other problems that he's been overseeing for the past 2 years that he's been in office. And this is just, why now? Like, it's just dumb that they would do this when he's already in charge of all these other projects. And he have political ambitions. He was only vice president, didn't never want to be president, doesn't want to run for re-election now. And here's something else. He is going to stay here. He's saying, you want to charge me with corruption? Bring it. Uh, Alberto Fujimori, who was our president when we were, all getting adopted, he left. He knew that he was going to be, I guess he was still in office, so he would have been impeached, right? And then sent to prison, which he eventually was, but he left.
Mm-hmm.
Alejandro Toledo left. Alan Garcia killed himself, right? Last year, a year before.
Are those all presidents after him? After Fujimori?
So Garcia was right before, and then he got elected again in like 2000, right? In like the 2000s. So that's a whole nother thing, right? That people, that's also another thing. So a lot of people are criticizing the critics, are criticizing the protesters, in part because they're like, well, you're the ones who voted for the Congress that we have.
Mm.
So they have a point. They do, right? And I think legally they could do what they did, and especially considering that the president, was it a year or two ago? Well, he's been trying different times, but obviously Congress has to act on it for him to do so legally, to actually, assume the role of Congress and stuff, kind of becoming like a dictator, right? Because he would be, removing the power of one branch of government. So he has been trying to do that, but that's because they're just, they just twiddle their thumbs all the time, right? They don't do a whole lot, but Congress did do this. And yes, some people have been criticizing the protesters because they are like, yeah, you voted them in, you backed them, right? That's the part of the reason that we have them is because, of us. But at the same time, it's really hard, and I'm not too, I don't know too much about the Peruvian electoral process, right? How you put a candidate on the ballot exactly. I don't think there are primaries. I think it's very independent. You actually just have, because you don't just have Democrat, Republican. You've got a lot of people representing a lot of different interests. Not even, liberal conservative is not the way to look at it. Yeah, there are some groups that ideologically lean left, and then there are some groups that ideologically lean to the right. But you've got all different, you've got religions involved also, right? Evangelicals, and all different like private interest groups, maybe more pro foreign investment, less foreign investment, that kind of stuff. So it's really, you think of a multi-party system. Peru certainly participates in a multi-party system, for sure. So.
They're independent. There aren't necessarily parties, right? To a certain extent, or no?
So there are political parties,
okay.
But it's really hard to pinpoint on their ideology.
I see.
Right. You'll have like a center-right, a center-left party, an extremist left, an extremist right party, maybe a more just independent party. A popular force, right, like I was saying, has lost a lot of their power. They were like the right wing riding on the Fujimori legacy, right? Because Fujimori did do a lot of things, right? When he was in office, people still praise him for getting rid of the terrorism. He had the support of the United States and, right, I guess like the free world and everything, because we were in like, the end of the Cold War, but still we were still in the Cold War and stuff. So, and he changed our currency, right? The currency we have is all from that time, right? I remember because my parents went and they had intis, which was the previous money. And
I didn't
then
even know that existed. Intis.
Yeah, intis, right? Which is sol, right?
Yeah.
Which is the currency now is called el nuevo sol.
Yeah.
Because you had sols when Peru first became independent, and they changed it, and then you had intis, and my parents had a little bit of those, and then they had sols. I guess they were just recently getting them into circulation at that time. And
That's really
so Fujimori did quite a bit, right? Because you're trying to recover from, right? Inflation, hyperinflation, kind of like what happened to Venezuela,
Mm-hmm.
you know, in terms of inflation, hyperinflation, and that's what happened. So he did some good. I'd say he did some good. I'd also say he did a lot of bad, right? Corruption being one of them. And but you know this political party that lasted until now, right? Literally like within the last couple of years, rode the coattails of his legacy and had influence in a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And just recently, people are kind of wising up to that. And like I said, you know, I don't blame the people. I mean, I blame the Spanish conquest in part because that's the reason why Peru can't, you know, do nice things for themselves. That's why, you know, the foreign companies are the ones that are here with the funds and the know-how to get things done. That's why, you know, the people don't know how to elect good officials, right? I don't blame, it's hard, you know. Yeah, are the people to blame? Yes and no, right? It's just history, time of just not being able to develop education, for example, right? And that's, I guess, you know, the big thing Peru is going to have to oversee, you know, in the decades to come. So, you know, in the hope that, you know, we will be able to become more independent and more developed, right, in the long run.
Yeah, I guess that kind of just goes back to like traditions too, you know, just because at the end of the day, like I remember you talking to, I think, Milagros, and we were talking about what would we do in the book club, like what would we do if we could go down there and we could be anything, you know, what kind of job would we take or make? And you know, a lot of us were kind of talking about like food vendors, right? Because that's kind of like a typical or traditional thing that you would do, you know, maybe like a food cart or something. But just going back to maybe not wanting to change with the times, and specifically like down there, you know, change not necessarily being a frequent thing, you know, and having it be a little bit harder to change, because I know they're very traditional, and I guess I can only speak from like my birth parents. I remember going there the first time, them not having like a refrigerator or a microwave, and then going back recently and they had a wash machine and a refrigerator and a microwave. But there's two parts of the house. The front of the house, which is my mom and dad's, it's still like wood and dirt, and then the back of the house, which is my sisters and her husband and their kids, it's very like tiled and painted, and so like a lot more modern. And it's just so funny, there's that giant divide just physically in the house. And so just kind of going back to the Peruvians and changing, and maybe not even wanting to change just because of the Spanish coming in and creating such a change and like taking over.
Yeah, and I think we read the Hilaria Superwoman book, right, the first book. And you know, to those who have never read it before, right, she mentions that, you know, we never used to drink alcohol. It's the Spanish who gave us the alcohol, and, you know, made us the way that we are, and introduced a lot of customs. Men never used to cut their hair, but the Spanish introduced short hair and stuff like that, right? There's a lot that they introduced us to, but didn't teach us why or how to cultivate, you know, literally and symbolically, right? Our own, you know, a better way of life. And
Yeah, it's
stuff.
always interesting. Speaking about the hair, I was just kind of throughout my whole life, even like as like in high school, I always wondered like it always bothered me why like Hispanic dudes, they always had that so clean cut, and it just had little spiky hair, and everything was like clean. It was a nice fade in the back, and I'm just like, I just remember all the time being like, I have long hair, I have X, Y, and Z hair because I don't want to be like those typical guys. And I guess now that you say that, it just kind of like relates, where it's like, it's not, maybe it's not their fault. Maybe, you know, that in that retrospect, you know, because their fathers and came from whatever, Mexico, Peru, Ecuador, and that's kind of like maybe the lifestyle that they adapted, but they don't know why it is that maybe they do these little small things like get a haircut like that. Maybe that's why they don't necessarily have like long hair to a certain extent. And I don't know, just connecting weird dots in my head.
No, absolutely. I mean, the Incas always used to have long hair, right? Not too sure about the Mayans or the Aztecs, but a lot of indigenous, right, tribes or empires, for that matter, used to have long hair. And, I think Bolivia and Ecuador are a little bit better at this, whereas Peru still retains, a little bit more of, I guess, restrictive views on indigenism, right? It's right, and we read about this in the book club and stuff, right? Peru tends to be a little bit more conservative with appearance, tends to be a little bit more right wing, and tends to be a little bit more religious, most especially like Catholic religious. Whereas I think Ecuador or Bolivia, right, they're a little more liberal, but they're also at the same time also a little more liberal in the appearance. You look, they're going to be more guys with long hair, for example. So whereas in Peru, like from grade school, if you're a guy, gotta shave your head for school and stuff, right? So yeah, it's kind of very different.
Yeah. So now that we're kind of on traditions, I know we only have like maybe 20 minutes left. What's something that you wouldn't carry on from like traditions in the United States, and what's one thing in like Peru that you wouldn't like carry on? I guess an example would be this kind of weird traditions, right? So a weird tradition would be how they cut open a guinea pig, right? And then whatever's wrong with the guinea pig, they say that that's wrong with you. What's something that you wouldn't carry on?
I wouldn't carry that on anymore, for example, right? And now, so that's always going to be a debate. How much do you want to respect religion, right? For example, or respect indigenous culture and stuff versus what's actually better for people. And the debate goes on in the United States when we're talking about certain religions and certain policies and how to handle religions when they get dangerous, not only right to other people but also to themselves. And down here, you also have like the urban versus rural countryside indigenous divide. Yeah, so I wouldn't continue that, and I'll show you why. Because it hurts the people, in the long run. It's do I think it's a symbol of imperialism to necessarily say that we shouldn't they shouldn't do that anymore? If they want to do that because it makes them feel better, I'm fine with it. But you should also go to the doctor, because science, and I'm a, huge, I guess, right, proponent of science. And, being an atheist myself, right, I think science is the only way that can lead us to truth, and science and philosophy for that matter, right, to truth and to a better world. And if you cling to any of those old traditions at the expense of the well-being of other people, I think that's a very dangerous thing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I agree 100%. It's interesting too. Like I just asked myself that question. Science compared to like religion in that retrospect, maybe not even like religious, being part of a religious sect, like whether Judaism, Christianity, it's weird, right? Because it's like a lot of the things I do want to believe in terms of when it comes to science, when it comes to, medicine, the cutting edge of other things. And, but it's weird too, because it's like at the same time, there are these things that like you can't explain, and they just are. And maybe science hasn't caught up with those things yet. Maybe there's this unknown formula that we just tap into randomly that can have things go our way. I don't know, but it's just interesting too, because it's like I want 100% believe in science, but there's a certain element of that unknown variable that kind of like has me just like believe in something that I can't understand. And if you want to call it like a higher power, you want to call it God, that's just interesting, because I can only relate it to like parts of my life, parts of my life that were very like life and death, parts of my life that I was very emotionally like, traumatized, and I was in very dark places in my mind, only to, subconsciously kind of get a feeling of a way out. And that might have only happened because I was having a talk or one-on-one, like kind of self-reflection with maybe a higher being, maybe something. But for whatever reason, it did get me out of that moment. And And that's just interesting. That's, I don't know, maybe that relates, maybe it doesn't relate. But when you're talking about that, I couldn't help but like think about that other aspect of that unknown variable. That's weird. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know.
Yeah, well, like I said, I think a religion certainly has therapeutic purposes. And if you feel like it's something that's good for you to believe in, right? And I can certainly understand it and something I can certainly appreciate. I think that's entirely fine. I think my big problem before anything is always going to be if it's going to negatively affect other people. But if it doesn't do that, then and it helps you be a better person to other people, I think that's entirely okay. Just like, when we're talking about that, understanding people and their illogicalness here in Peru, right? We were talking about my family and everything, and understanding people. I think that's one thing, right? I was kind of subtly referring to was the religiousness of people down here and stuff, because it's something very, very different. It's not even, and I was raised Catholic, right? And, I was also devout for a period of time. And, I don't have as negative of a view as perhaps somebody that, didn't get raised with, any kind of religion in their life. But it certainly carried out, executed, right, in a very different way than what I'm used to as a Catholic from the United States of America, right? My ex-girlfriend was Catholic, very Catholic, and I remember attending some church services, and I remember, you can't go accept communion unless you've gone to confession, right? And so if you haven't gone to confession, don't even get up, don't even get in line. Whereas if you're in the United States and you've already gone to communion, and they look down on you for not getting up and going and getting communion and stuff, right? So it's they're very, very strict, following each thing point for point and stuff. And yeah, that's kind of how it is. But they'll also look at other things, right? Right, other things dealing with people's private lives that, with certain opinions that I don't think I share or can agree with, for that matter. And that's, that, again, the never-ending battle of living here with people with different views and a different kind of like belief and judgment system, for that matter.
So curious, you've never had something that, in your life that happened, and I don't know, for whatever reason, you were really thinking that it wasn't going to happen, or it could be anything, but it did happen. Like, do you just consider that as just like luck, or was that unknown variable that it was just my day and that just happened?
I guess I would be a little bit more on the side of right coincidence or luck, or something like that. I mean, yeah, so there are certain things, right? Like I was mentioning before with my sister and meeting her, like, my parents had just died, and then I met a sister and her, guardian had just died. So there's a sense in which, yeah, it's good luck though. It's a good coincidence, and it's brought us closer together. Yeah, it's unfortunate. Like, I don't believe in certain things. Like karma, I don't necessarily believe in, right? Just, don't do it again or something like that, right? So there's a little bit of, yeah, that's just my point of view, though.
Yeah, I think growing up, I always thought of religion as it was a way for people to cope. It was some higher being that people kind of use as an excuse, and I would bring that up a lot to my mom and my grandma because they were very religious. And I just thought when something goes bad, that's where they like ask for things, like.
But that's what I hate about religion in that retrospect, especially with the
Yeah.
Christianity version. Like,
Yeah.
I myself, I'm Jewish. I don't relate to that, but I do see it all the time. It's definitely in movies projected of just like, you do something bad, you go to the priest and you beg for your forgiveness to get into heaven. You do Hail Marys, you go to confession, all that stuff. I never really agreed with that.
And like,
I
you're
don't,
fixed.
I don't agree with agree with Judaism. I don't agree with Christianity. I don't agree with Islam, but I guess it's just that I agree with spirituality, like in that sense, where it's like, I know that science is the thing that we can't look away from, right? Like, science can help us in so many different facets of our life, whether it be like culturally as a community, or anything, but it's just like, I don't know, it's like that unknown variable that, you know, there are coincidences to a certain extent too, that I think that are, I don't know, out of our understanding of the reasoning behind why it happened that way. And as much as I'd like to think that it's like a sequence of random events that it just was your day and that's just roll of the dice and that's just how it is, I don't know, I feel like it's not proven in that retrospect. So my mind always kind of keeps that door not shut all the way, because I'm just like, I don't know. Like, I'll be a skeptic until proven otherwise in that sense. So, but yeah, like my personal, like I when I define like that spirituality aspect, I take religion of what people conceptualize, and spirituality of, like, I guess the root of this every religion, which is that God, that unknown being, you know, whether it's like the Native Americans believing in the spirits, whether it's like the Incans believing in their spirits, whether it's like the Africans, the Asians, whether then it goes even further in time or back in time with the Judaism, Islamic, like it all, I feel like, forms something. And I don't know what that is, because at the end of the day, you go back further enough in time, those words, those stories, they just get convoluted. And I if anything, I just want to know the truth, where that all stemmed from, you know. But I don't know, whatever. This is my thoughts.
Yeah. No, absolutely. You know, it makes you wonder if everything's just kind of the same thing, but just told differently, I
Yeah.
guess, a little bit, right? So one of the things that I found interesting, right, is that, you know, we were talking about my dad, you know, before and everything. He was a Freemason and stuff. So, yeah,
Wait,
my
what's
mom
that
was the
again?
Catholic one. I'm sorry?
What's a Freemason again?
Oh wow.
A
Wait.
Freemason, okay, it's all right. So there's like a lot of things there. Let's see, how would I explain this? Well, the only thing I know, my dad was a Freemason because his grandfather was a Freemason, and they did a lot of charity work, but it seems like it's more like a club
Mm.
for people. It seems like it's something people get into to get like better connections into certain organizations, kind of like a type of limited nepotism, I guess you could say, right? Because there are a lot of people in power in that were Freemasons.
Mm-hmm.
So in the United States, a lot of the founding fathers were Freemasons, right? George Washington,
Yeah,
Benjamin
wasn't it like a
Franklin.
cult
Yeah.
back when you go further enough? Like, in a certain extent, like people who, like a secretive kind of organization way back when, obviously, like it obviously, like, no, I mean, maybe
It,
not. I don't know.
it's not a secret organization. It's an organization or society rather with secrets,
Mm.
and it's a fraternity.
Mm.
That's all it is,
Yeah,
right?
because I see it
That's
on
how
all
much.
of these like crime shows on like they were a Freemason, and then nobody really knows what it is, and then they make it into like a cult.
Seen a National Treasure.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like, you know, God, Attention, and National Treasure, maybe like the Da Vinci Code, those,
Oh yeah,
right,
yeah.
different things. But yeah, no, I think it was just a fraternity, to be honest.
Okay.
But
Huh?
yeah, and yeah, to help just kind of like build business connections, really. That's kind of what it seemed like to me, because thing was early America, right? A lot of guys are like helping other Freemasons get into positions of power, stuff like that kind of happened. So you even had political parties, right, that were against, specifically just against Freemasonry, right?
Mm.
But why do I bring this up? Because the Freemasons actually, right, so they've become a lot more liberal. Oh, that's another thing. They used to only accept rich people,
Hmm.
but they've gotten a lot more liberal in the recent years. In the sense that they're being more welcoming to other religions, because it used to be you had to be, you know, a lost essentially to become a Freemason. Now you can be Jewish, you can be Catholic, you can be Muslim, so you could really be anything for that matter. But the one thing they believe in is a grand architect of the universe and
Mm.
stuff. So you have to believe in a grand architect of the universe. So if you belong to anything, you know, as Sam was mentioning, all the different religions, you know, of all different, you know, walks of life could be, you know, I don't think I would be a candidate because I'm just flat out atheist. But as long as you believe in something, you would certainly get in. And I think that's, you know, something that was, you know, was trying to establish some sort of unity. But I don't know. But I also bring this up because I also think, you know, that's part of the reason how and my father being just kind of skeptical on anything, right? Was kind of the way that I kind of ended up the way that I did. And it's made me open to different belief systems, especially down here. Um, and I think it's certainly helped out with me being able to survive as long as I did, right? Down here. So certainly appreciative of that. But I would also like to, I guess, mention a few of the things, right, with the time that I have that I had sent you in the WhatsApp.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a few things, right? I think in a previous episode, you had both talked about the idea of adoptee guilt.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just kind of like to give my 2 cents in on that.
Mm-hmm.
Adoptee guilt, I think, is something that can be resolved if you take a more active approach in your adoption. And to alleviate some of those issues that surround your adoption, what does that mean? And like you were asking me before, if you could go back to Peru and do something down here, what would it be exactly? And I think being able to use your opportunities for the better of your Peruvian community, for that matter, I think might be a way to alleviate that guilt, because the guilt is always like, why me? Why am I in such a better situation? Why does my family suffer? Why do other people suffer? Why do just a few selected adoptees? But wouldn't, if you go back and you do the good things,
Mm-hmm.
that wouldn't that alleviate the guilt? I don't know, right? So that's just my point of view. And I always thought adoption is more complicated than just going from a bad place to a good place. Right? There are so many, things that go into like that statement, and unfortunately, and I don't know how a lot of you feel about like the idea of historical revisionism, for that matter. You
What?
know how
Yeah.
now. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was gonna ask like what that means, historical revisionism.
It's like, so the thing is, in a lot of, okay, so conservatives, right, like to attack the education system, the public education system, because they think that they're too interested in undoing the legacy of, like, for example, the founding fathers and stuff, right? Or right, colonialism, for that matter, right? Traditionally, and I think most of us, right, have grown up, it's like a Revolutionary War happened, Civil War happened, whatever, right? And these guys did good. They established our republic, and everyone's happy forever and stuff. But you leave out the indigenous community, Native Americans, a lot of those, a lot of those parts of American history were left out. So now the movement by a lot of, universities, the public school system, is to undo that narrative that the white man was the, more advanced, more developed, like the more moral person versus the savage Native Americans. The problem, yeah.
Oh no, that's interesting though, that perspective, right? Because like I don't know, like from my personal take on that too. At the end of the day, the Europeans, they conquered, right? That's what they did, regardless of the knowledge that each other culture had within themselves. But it's interesting too, right? And like how does one teach that? How does like one teach the facts? Like the facts is like something like, it's an unfortunate that the Europeans created steel, and from steel, like, or like they took gunpowder from like the Chinese, and they created like a gun, and then that was able to, like obviously they were able to take control of other regions, but at the same time, like learning about that, but also learning about like the cultural aspects of each culture that was taken over, and having that be a part of like the curriculum as well.
Right, like the bigger picture.
Exactly, more balanced in that retrospect.
Yeah, and I think I'm all for it. Obviously, I really think it's a good idea, seeing history from both sides.
Yeah.
But what does it do to our adoption story? because our adoption story also kind of depends a little bit on, right, our biological family disorderly and our white mostly white family, right? Could be anything, but our American family being, kind of like the savior to us and stuff. So a lot of people, right, undoing that hierarchy, kind of, I don't, I don't know. It'd be interesting to see how a lot of adoptees kind of like see that, that whole undoing the hierarchy and stuff.
Of like the narrative of how Americans came and like saved you.
It's no longer saved you. It's
Americans.
Because, yeah, then there's a lot of people who think that, my life might not necessarily be better in the United States, or right, or they view their parents in a very different light than, or maybe you start to see your biological family as better, right? I don't know. Then you went from it's not going from a bad place to a good place, which is the traditional adoptee narrative and stuff, right?
But that's interesting too, right?
Puts it into question.
It's like, I'm trying to think of like everything, right? Like that comes with that. And I don't know. I feel like majority of the things that like people get adopted for is for because, maybe their family can't take care of them. Potentially. And maybe there's obviously exceptions to the average of why people get adopted. And it's interesting though, like in this world, obviously you can't like think about shoulda, woulda, couldas of different people, like country, but America is like number one in that sense, like global economic, like powerhouse America. And so it's interesting because that's like, I guess why Americans or Europeans in the English, the French go to countries who aren't that economically viable, and take potentially like a child to a potentially better place. But it's like, dang, it's like the one thing I can relate to it is just kind of, my mom, never was a mom, but she did the best she could with me, and regardless if I was adopted or not, I can always say, well, you should have been better. You should have done this better. But she's just like, yo, I did the best with what I had at the time. I don't know if that like how that relates to anything, but that's just kind of like my like perspective on it to a certain extent. Like I don't know, like Americans or people who are like rich or wealthy, who have a better situation, better environment. They're just doing the best, I'd hope. Obviously when you come to the people who get like the emotional abuse that adoptees face, or physical abuse that adoptees face, I'd like to think that wasn't intention. That wasn't the intention of adopting a child. Obviously there are variables to the average of what I'm trying to say, but it's just interesting. Like, it's like, as much as I would like to bring back to my point, as much as I would like to say like that it is saved, it I don't know, kind of is safe.
Right. So a few things, right?
Yeah.
I've got a few minutes, right? Yeah, I agree with you on my father's role also. How you see your mom, I also agree that my father, he wasn't the best, but he did the best with what he had, right? Maybe he didn't have like that emotional upbringing, and he wasn't as much of a go-getter as I think my mom would have been, especially when it came to school. So it's, I still appreciate what he did, and there's nothing that's going to change my opinion on that, right? I still value his input in my life, right? So there's that. Then, regarding, like the history and, places in society and stuff like that, there's a sense in which, we're all kind of a product of capitalism. We're all kind of a product of, even me living here, I'm, my formation, my education, my background, my way of thinking, and my citizenship status. I'm still an American, still have my name. I'm still an adoptee. I just happen to be living in Peru, right? That's never going to change either. And that's very much a consequence of everything America did, good, bad, or ugly, and I think that also is what pits us against Latinos in many ways, especially first generation or just any Latino immigrants, is that we're just, we're not like that. We had all the benefits of, the growing up in America and being in a certain family and not having to, work or fight every day for what we have. And I think that that's always going to separate us from that community. So really the best we can ever hope for is just like, maybe just like empathy. I know a lot of adoptees tend to be, associated with the Democratic Party, for example, including myself, right? And then also, you're trying to find a sense of solidarity with other Latinos, but it turns into really just kind of like a race thing, because at the end of the day, we are very, very different for that reason. And, I might be a Democrat, but I'm not extreme left either, mostly because I do know that capitalism has benefited me, and was it my American upbringing has benefited me even down here and stuff. So I can't say that you know, um, I can't say things have really been difficult. The worst thing that's happened to me is my parents dying, and honestly, that's it. Everything else I've been able to kind of really take care of myself, and me being with my family has only made my life richer.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a question I saw the other day on an adoptee page, and it was what do you think the life expectancy of an adoptee is? And I guess I just didn't think that there was like a
What's our shelf life?
Yeah. I was just kind of like, I didn't know that there was like for me, I think what's a life expectancy if I have cancer? That those are the big questions that like when I found out I had cancer, I didn't really know what it was, and so that's kind of one of the number one things I went to is like, what's this mean?
That's actually like a realistic fact, right? About that life expectancy of adoptees, because with a lot of adoptees, we don't know our background in terms of the medical history that we have. Like we were talking with Phil earlier about like certain foods that our culture hasn't, generations have never experienced, like a hamburger. Like processed foods to a certain extent.
But can you do that as a whole though? Because like adoptees, there's like in country adoptees and like
true.
international
that's
adoptees,
also true.
And there's Peruvian adoptees, and so I don't know if you can necessarily just say like that they're their own race.
That's a good question. I guess you'd have to section them off by as best as according. I think American adoption would be a little bit different. But
a lot different, I feel like.
Yeah.
A lot different.
I just feel like, I don't know, this might be like kind of like, I don't mean to be rude, but it's just kind of like, I feel like in-country adoption is a lot more easier, right? It's a little bit easier to go adopt a kid, and I don't want to say it's like adopting a puppy or anything like it's that easy, but I feel like it's
in-country?
Yes. Like
you sure about that?
Like United States, like adopting from the United States versus like international, like the processes, or do you think it's not?
I just know that, right, with my adoption, and I think with a lot of our adoptions, it was easier to do it internationally. I don't know why. Maybe Milagros can.
Well, that makes sense though, right? Because a more like stable country with a lot more laws, a lot more history, and that accountability in terms of just being in control of certain things, you'd have to assume that adopting a kid from the country is a lot more complicated. You have to go through a lot more barriers per se, because
maybe it's just because I see so many what are those centers like with people who are in the United States, and that there's just more not centers. What is it called? Not oh my god, I was gonna say halfway homes.
Yeah, no. Orphanages.
Yes. Orphanages. And just like, I guess when I was adopted, I remember going to, or not when I was adopted, but I remember seeing the agencies, and you can, it's so weird to me to think about this. Like you could go to an agency like open house, and there's an adoptee, kind of like a puppy adopt house, open house, and you go and you can like kind of pick one. And maybe my bias is just on like a lot of the movies and shows I've watched. So to be honest, I haven't looked into like how easy or how hard it is. And I guess what I have looked into is just I had to do like a 20-page report one time on like adopting internationally and just the process of that. So I guess that's
I'm
where
sure,
my hairs come from.
right. I'm sure no matter what you do, it's probably a process in and of itself.
Yeah.
Um, but I also think what Sam is saying, that's the kind of the impression. Like, I didn't do as much research as you or
Oh, no,
Milagros
yeah.
or right. But I get the sense that yeah, right, when you're adopted, because what you do is you adopt from here first, and then it's like getting married, right? You get married in Peru first, and then you get married in the United States second. Down here, you adopt a child first, and generally Peru's just like you're from America, you've got a stable job. There you go. That's it. That's all you need to
Oh,
do.
yeah.
And then you go into the United States, and then they validate it and stuff. Whereas the United States in a domestic adoption would just have oversight, a lot more oversight, and see things. They could even go to your house if you had like a bad day. I don't know, like
Yeah.
I
things like
suppose,
that,
yeah.
And just those facts are there, right? Like the health facts of these people for whatever. So
Oh,
obviously
yeah.
there's always, things that are not the average, but like you have the mother's medical history, the father's medical history. Those things are vetted, I think, a little bit more. So like for instance, what we were talking about with medical things like, food or environment, I think that those are more known variables, and when you're coming to international, those are more like unknown variables. Yes, when you come into a country, like I said, I don't know that specifics, but I'd assume, like you said, you come into the country, they'll look at you and they'll make sure everything's okay. But those long process things, like for instance, like cancer, like you don't really, you can't see it until it just starts. But like I'm sure that if you knew the family history, you knew that there was a lineage, like for instance ovarian cancer in my family, you'd be able to like, know of that. Some people don't know that they have cancer in their family, and they just, from China or from Peru, and then they just have to get thrown in there only to only to get even deeper, right? To have like eat, like they love Twinkies, and only for that Twinkie to just somehow activate and then spark something, and then like you're not well. I don't know, but
Yeah. Just more unknowns, I suppose.
yeah. So in that retrospect, I think it's a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, it's certainly a process for sure. It's since been amended, and I've talked to them down here, right, with the Ministerio de la Mujer, right, which is the woman ministry of the woman, right? But yeah, that's where you go through the adoption process.
Mm.
They're allegedly supposed to do investigations for you if you want to find your biological family, but they're just like, oh, you were adopted too soon, so we can't do that and stuff.
Mm.
But
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Because now
but
you have
it's
to go
changed.
through like a process, isn't it? Like you can't just get adopted at a young age.
Yeah, right. That's what Milagros was saying. Yeah, it's because I guess just in general courts favor unity, right? With biological family before going through other routes and stuff, right? So yeah, that certainly makes sense. So they want to make sure that there's no other avenue that could take years.
Right.
So, but absolutely. Yeah. Did you have any other questions? To answer a couple more.
Um,
I had a good time today. It's thanks for having me on the show.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, appreciate you being here with us.
It's kind of cool to kind of go all around, like I said, sometimes it's about adoption, sometimes it's not. But I just think it's so unique, you being down there and having that perspective, because it's something I always wanted to do, is to live with my birth family, only until I did take the leap down there to live with them for 2 months. And honestly, the first week I was looking at flights back home to the United States, because I was like, this is too much. For one, I did it the wrong way. I didn't learn Spanish before I went down there. So it's just me with a bunch of like Spanish and Quechua people, speaking people, which are my family. And for me, it was it was weird, because they were so connected to me. They were just like, oh my God, like crying and like hugging. And I'm just kind of like, hey guys, like, where do I put my stuff? And it was, they made it as like comfortable as they can. And looking back at it, they did a lot of things. They gave me my own room. It was a brand new bed. I had a mirror. I had like this nice kind of stand by the window to put like clothes and things, and like a table. And but I kind of feel like selfish, or a little bit by that not being enough. By needing to have like my things in the United States. those things, that was more of a comfort to me. So then for me, it's just, I just get so interested with you just being down there and just being able to kind of get rid of those things in the United States, right? Like, I feel like down there, your material things, right? It doesn't mean as much, I feel like. And that's what I do enjoy about being in Peru. But then I'm always with that weird balance of like, I really want to be down there, but then I kind of really like being here. And then it's just, yeah, even down to the food. So I guess to me, it's so interesting that you've been down there and kind of, like you said, you get to go back. You know, you go back to the United States and things too when you travel around. So that's interesting, but to me, like, that's just such a giant leap, I suppose, to just dive in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think it has a little bit to do with just having been alone, right? Having had no strings attached in the United States.
Yeah, I was about to say
And
that.
then,
Yeah.
Like, in that retrospect, that's a hugely, like, thing to make a jump like that too. So it's unfortunate.
Kind of having the like an opportunity to do it.
Yeah, because
not a lot of things tie you back.
Because you have your family, like, to a certain extent here. Like, if I lost my family, my mom,
Yeah.
I just untethered. Like, I'd be like, I don't know. Yeah, but yeah, go on. Sorry, I was just.
No, 100%. And to kind of bring this back full circle with some of the things we were saying before, right? Well, with a lot of the things we were saying before, why do you know so much about stuff down here? Did you seek this out? And no, I didn't. Part of it is, was I interested in things? Yeah, like a little bit, but would I even be here if my parents were still alive? Would I even be interested in Peru? Would I even be participating in the book club, or on the Facebook group? And this is something I spoke about recently in the book club, was that, of the people on that Facebook group that we have, that's got to be like 1% of all the adoptees in everywhere, for that matter. There are thousands upon thousands of adoptees. So the only thing I would recommend to all of us, for that matter, is to keep the adoption dialogue going and stuff, right? There are people with all different views on the biological family, the adoptive families, but the people that are talking about it, right? It's unfortunately so few of a number, so small of a number, that if there are people that are interested in finding out more or want to talk about it, that the dialogue continues. And yeah, in terms of me, right? I definitely would not be here if my parents were still alive. But them dying has also, done some things which I think my life has become richer as a result. So I'm hoping through that, and my ability to heal down, knowing what I need to heal, knowing the things that I need in life, that my life expectancy goes up also.
Yeah, no, I was definitely thinking about what you were saying, to keep talking about like that, like, because I don't know if specifically, I can't necessarily speak for all adoptees, but especially for like Peruvian adoptees, people from South America, I don't know, we're a different breed within that sect of adoptees.
Yeah.
And could I say like even American Peruvian compared to like European, or I don't know, maybe even Asian. That's just interesting, my perspective of like being like 13 years old, just stumbling across like a Facebook page that was just like a whole bunch of like Peruvian adoptees. I don't know. It's like, being able to like have like quality like content of somebody explaining like how it was like, what their story was like, and just having so many different stories that you can pivot from and just look at. It's not just like a one kind of like, this was me and this is how it is. And if it doesn't line up to your life or you can't relate to it, it's just like foreign to you and you don't understand. You're like, whatever, next. Like, I don't really care about this. But that's just interesting. But also I do have actually a question that kind of relates to, what's your future look like? What do you have what do you have in mind? What are your goals for like the next like 5 to 10 years, let's say?
That changes all the time. And
okay,
just like what I was saying with, right, I didn't realize I was going to be here either. I never would have thought that I would be here right now. Like I was saying before, when I was in the university, I wanted to be a lawyer and everything. And now I'm taking these classes just for fun, and I'm starting to get more into Latin American history, politics, just kind of like, how things work down here, and I'm starting to kind of get a little bit more interested in that. And maybe my way of alleviating my adoption guilt might be to do some sort of activism, right? When COVID is over, of course. But just kind of doing something that I think would be able to kind of contribute to the well-being of people down here. Family first, and then we'll see afterward if I can spread that to something bigger. Definitely, I will definitely continue teaching English as a second language, and my sister is also in line to potentially get a green card in the United States. That's something we're gonna kind of like look into. We did this back in 2013, actually, at the end of 2013. I'm gonna have to kind of see what would entail if for example, if I have to be in the United States and working, for example. So those are things that I'm gonna have to take into consideration too. Just keep going and just enjoy the time that I'm down here. Enjoy the time that I'm with the people that I'm with, like my sister, and the family that I have down here, because you don't know when people are not going to be in your life anymore. So it's always best to take advantage of those times you have with people, your loved ones, before it's too late, for sure.
Definitely.
I feel like that's a solid place to kind of wrap it up here. But I think I also, like, with this, like, I want to do, like, a part 2 and 3 almost, like, another time, just because I feel like this is, like, the tip, like, the tip of the iceberg. There's so many things to, like, kind of explore and to talk about it. And what I like, having these conversations is that it kind of leads to other things, and I enjoy that.
Definitely. I definitely see there's a lot more that we can get into. Definitely jot down ideas or stuff.
Yeah, write some ideas down, and we can coordinate, and I'd be happy to participate again.
Awesome.
Sounds good. We'll have fun with your homework tonight.
Thank you.
And I will talk to you soon. Well, we're meeting again Monday or Tuesday?
Not too sure. I think it's Tuesday.
I'm gonna have to design a calendar because I feel like we're always like not sure when we're meeting up
always
again.
Like changing. Yeah, but stay safe and everything, right? With the second wave of coronavirus, I'm gonna do the same. And be well.
Sounds good. Thank you. You too.
Thanks.
See
Take
you
care.
soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.